I didn't come back home expecting a damn parade. I just thought someone would remember my name. My boots hit US soil after 3 years of fighting in a frozen hell nobody back home can even point to on a map, a place our commanders called Sector Whitefall. Eastern Europe, near the border of a country politicians pretend doesn't exist. Towns leveled to ash, winters so cold your tears froze before they hit the ground, enemies hiding in every broken window. We weren't sent there for liberation, like the news would eventually claim. We were sent to clean up a conflict that the government wanted to be buried under the snow. And yeah, I was one of the few that actually made it back. My name's Sergeant Callie Brooks, 29 years old, U.S. Army, former scout sniper on Task Force Northbridge. I spent years moving through silent streets where every shadow could shoot you, and every building might blow sky high if you stepped wrong. I learned how to disappear, how to stalk, how to pull the trigger before the world woke up. All those skills kept me alive overseas. I just never thought I'd need them back home. When I finally stepped off that bus into my hometown, Ridgeview, Colorado, I expected at least familiar faces, maybe a few welcome backs, awkward hugs, something. Instead, I came home to boarded-up shops, sheriff's trucks patrolling like we lived under martial law, and people looking over their shoulders like every street was a war zone. It wasn't the same town I left. Hell, it didn't even feel American anymore. The grocery store owner I grew up with pretended not to recognize me. My old basketball coach crossed the street when he saw me coming. Even my high school friends, the ones who wrote, "Come home safe" on Instagram, acted like I was a stranger. I thought maybe I changed. Maybe war turned me cold, quiet, unrecognizable. But then I learned the truth. It wasn't me they forgot. Someone made them forget. The first night back, I went to my parents' house expecting home-cooked dinner, tears, stories, whatever normal families do. The house was dark, windows shattered, door wide open, snow blowing across the living room floor like it had been abandoned for months. No sign of them, just a county notice stapled to the front. Property seized for criminal investigation. My parents, two people who worked at the same hardware store for 25 years, were labeled criminals overnight? Nah, something stunk. I tried calling the sheriff's office. They put me on hold for 20 minutes, then hung up. I tried again. Same thing. Then I tried showing up in person, and the deputy at the desk smirked and said, "Ma'am, you being military don't mean you can waltz in here demanding answers. This is an ongoing case. Your best move is to let it go." Let it go? I survived ambushes, airstrikes, snipers, and warlords who stitched human ears to their vests. You think I'm scared of a small-town deputy? That night, I slept in my truck outside my ruined home with my rifle case under my head like a pillow. The air smelled like rust and pine. Coyotes howled in the distance. And for the first time since the war, I felt that old familiar chill in my bones. The one that said, "Someone out there thinks they can erase me." Next morning, I started digging. Turns out Ridgeview got taken over by a private security firm while I was overseas. Not cops, not military, mercenaries in sheriff uniforms, paid by the mayor to run the town like a damn fiefdom. They controlled the businesses, the land, the courts, and apparently my parents' fate. People whispered about them like a ghost story. Black Ridge Tactical. Sounds like patriots, looks like law enforcement, but underneath, just a bunch of armed thugs who operate outside federal oversight. The kind of guys we fought overseas, not saluted at home. And guess who trained them? A commander from my old unit. Someone who left Whitefall early. Someone who betrayed us. His name used to be Captain Mason Hale. Now he ran Ridgeview like his personal kingdom, and he didn't want veterans coming home asking questions. That's when I realized this wasn't corruption. This was occupation. And I wasn't just a forgotten soldier returning home. I was the only one who remembered how to fight. I zipped up my old field jacket, grabbed my gear, and stared down Main Street like it was a hostile village. If they wanted a ghost, I'd give them a ghost. This time, I wasn't fighting for a flag. I was fighting for the town that forgot me, and I'd save them even if they never thanked me. Because some wars don't end overseas. Some just follow you home. When I came back to Saber Creek after the Frostline Ridge disaster, I expected at least one familiar face to show up at the bus stop. A neighbor, a friend, hell, even an old teacher pretending to care. But the platform was empty. Just a flickering streetlight and a stray dog pawing at a trash bin. I stood there in my faded uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder, trying to convince myself that maybe the town didn't hear I was arriving. Maybe people were busy. Maybe it wasn't personal. But deep down, it was already clear. This was a town that moved on the second I boarded that deployment plane. Everything felt smaller, quieter, not in a peaceful way, but in the way that tells you people are whispering behind windows. I walked past the diner where my mom used to work, expecting at least a nod, a half smile, something. The waitress looked at me like I was a stranger, not a veteran, not a survivor, just a problem that wandered in from the highway. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that I'd get used to the silence, but the silence wasn't neutral, it was intentional. I'd served in a fictional conflict in a cold Eastern European region most Americans forget exists. I survived ambushes, starvation, trench frost, nights where you don't sleep because you're afraid the snow itself might kill you. But somehow, walking into my childhood town with its peeling paint and winter-bitten sidewalks felt more hostile than enemy territory. My house wasn't even mine anymore. Bank foreclosure, sold at auction while I was still missing in action. I stood on the sidewalk staring at the porch swing my father built, now repainted yellow, like a cosmetic bandage covering a bruise. A stranger opened the door and stared at me like I was trespassing. I didn't blame them. In a way, I was trespassing on memories that weren't mine anymore. I rented a small room above the old hardware store, same place where I bought my first pair of work gloves at 16. The owner barely recognized me. When he finally did, he muttered, "Didn't think you made it back," as if I'd offended him by surviving. It should have pissed me off, but I'd seen real ugliness overseas. This was just petty human cowardice. Still, something felt off. People weren't just distant, they were cautious, like I was radioactive, like any conversation with me could blow up their lives. It took less than a week to understand why. Saber Creek had changed while I was fighting wars that weren't mine. The sheriff's office was crawling with new deputies, all with identical haircuts and the same smug faces. The new mayor, Doyle, acted like a man who bought the town instead of being elected to run it. New businesses popped up too fast. Bars, distribution warehouses, a trucking yard that ran all night. Money was moving, but not the kind that builds schools or fixes roads. The kind that buys silence. Then came the first real sign something was wrong. A kid, maybe 16, ran up to me outside the gas station, breathing hard, eyes wide. He pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm and whispered, "They said you're next," before sprinting away like I was cursed. The paper wasn't a note. It was a list. 6 names. All soldiers from my unit. All labeled deceased. 4 were real. 2 were alive when I last saw them. My name was the 7th. They'd already written it. Brooks. Samantha. K.I.A. A mistake like that doesn't happen on accident. Someone wanted me dead on paper long before I ever stepped foot off the bus. Once you're dead in government files, you stop being a problem. You stop asking questions. You stop existing. That's when the memories from Frostline Ridge started crawling back. Not the gunfire, not the snow pits, not the bodies, but the betrayal. The feeling that someone in command wanted our mission wiped from the record. I started digging quietly, asking harmless questions, checking public logs, visiting families of my unit members. People slammed doors in my face. Some cried. Some pretended they'd never met their own sons. That's when I realized Saber Creek wasn't ignoring me because they forgot me. They were ignoring me because they were terrified of being associated with me. Something bigger was happening, something that used my unit, my service, and my survival as loose threads they wanted cut. The deeper I went, the more obvious it became. Officials weren't just corrupt, they were connected. Money flowed from a foreign-backed energy company to local officials routed through false nonprofits. The same company my unit was sent to investigate overseas, though they never told us that. We were told we were disrupting insurgent supply routes. In reality, we were stumbling onto illegal American contracts. And Frostline Ridge? What happened there wasn't an attack. It was a cleanup operation. They wanted no witnesses, and the only witness left standing was me. But I wasn't the same girl who enlisted at 20. I wasn't afraid. I'd faced men who hid behind snowstorms and mortars. These people hid behind spreadsheets and committee meetings. I knew the type, cowards dressed as leaders. They ran this town like a cartel outpost, except worse. At least overseas, the enemy didn't pretend they were helping you. The town's fear finally cracked into violence the night I confronted Sheriff Cutter. I wasn't provoking him. I just asked why one of the deputies had been following me. The man didn't answer with words. He answered with a punch. They dragged me into the alley behind the station, where the cameras didn't reach. Cutter leaned over me, breath sour, fingers digging into my collar, and said, "You're dead on paper. Stop trying to be alive." That's when it became clear. Saber Creek didn't forget me. They erased me. That night, I sat in my small rented room, knuckles bruised, ribs aching, staring at the stained ceiling while the heater clicked and hissed. I finally understood I wasn't dealing with neglect. I was dealing with a cover-up. And whatever they were hiding, they were willing to destroy entire families to keep it buried. The list in my pocket wasn't a warning, it was a kill roster, mine included. Part of me felt the old military instinct. Gather intel, stay silent, move carefully. But another part, the part that crawled out of a death trap in the snow, whispered that maybe it was time to stop being quiet. So I made the one promise they never expected from me. If Saber Creek wanted a ghost, I would show them one. The kind that doesn't rest, the kind that doesn't forgive, the kind that doesn't stay buried. Everything shifted the night I decided I wasn't going to be the quiet soldier Saber Creek expected. I woke before sunrise, the kind of cold morning where the air sticks to your lungs and every instinct tells you to crawl back under the blankets. But that frost on the windows reminded me of Frostline Ridge, the same shimmering glaze, the same stillness before chaos. The memory wasn't comforting, but it lit something in me. If they wrote me off as dead, then I didn't owe the town a polite explanation. I owed the truth to the soldiers who never made it home, and I owed myself the chance to burn down the lies built over our graves. I started with the one place corruption always thinks it's safe: paperwork. Saber Creek's town hall was a 2-story building with creaky steps and an American flag that looked older than half the people working inside. The receptionist gave me a look like she was staring at a ghost, which was fair. Technically, I was. She tried to stall, asking if I had an appointment, but soldiers don't need appointments for problems they didn't create. I walked straight to the public records room, ignoring the mumbled protests behind me. Town files smell like dust and mold, like no one wants to touch the truth because it's been rotting too long. But I wasn't scared of rot. I'd seen bodies frozen stiff in snow, their stories evaporating faster than breath in icy air. Compared to that, moldy paper wasn't threatening. I started digging. Property transfers, budget allocations, emergency fund withdrawals. All of it pointed toward one weird pattern: money funneling into a winter recovery relief program, even during years without snowstorms. Out-of-state contractors paid triple the normal rate. Supply trucks listed as essential municipal deliveries showing up at 2 a.m. Lots of signatures from Mayor Doyle and Sheriff Cutter. But the biggest shock was seeing a familiar name on a funding request: Colonel Whitlock. He wasn't supposed to have anything to do with civilian infrastructure. His job overseas was liaison, which everyone knew was code for whatever shady deals the U.S. government didn't want fingerprints on. Yet, here he was, signing off on shipments entering Saber Creek. My pulse didn't just race, it roared. Whitlock had been there at Frostline Ridge. He sent us into that frozen valley. He told us intel was solid. He told us backup was close. He lied. But what hit harder was realizing maybe that mission wasn't meant to succeed at all. Maybe we were never meant to leave alive. I grabbed every document I could, snapping photos with my phone before the deputies inevitably came sniffing around. On my way out, the receptionist suddenly found her voice and told me I wasn't allowed back without written permission. I smiled politely because sometimes the scariest thing you can give someone is calm acknowledgement. She looked away first. The next stop was the trucking yard on the edge of town, the same one I'd noticed receiving late-night shipments. I parked far enough away to avoid cameras, then walked the perimeter, boots crunching over gravel and frozen mud. Diesel fumes hung thick in the air, masking the metallic scent I remembered all too well from military convoys. Men in plain jackets moved crates off a flatbed. They weren't locals. Their movements were too disciplined, too familiar. Former military, contracted, probably paid under the table. I crouched behind a stack of tires and listened. They weren't speaking English at first, Eastern European dialect, close to the region I'd deployed in. When they switched to English, the words stuck to me like ice. Shipments late, Whitlock wants confirmation before tomorrow night. Hearing Whitlock's name in my hometown felt like a punch that knocks the wind out of you. Everything clicked together. The trucks coming in from ports stateside, the funds disguised as emergency relief, the sudden political power of men who couldn't run a lemonade stand without stealing quarters. Saber Creek wasn't just corrupt, it was a funnel point, a quiet branch in a much larger illegal supply chain. And someone had decided it was the perfect place to bury any soldier who knew too much. My unit wasn't killed in a random ambush. Frostline Ridge wasn't a tragic battlefield loss. We were loose ends. Someone kicked a metal drum nearby, and I flinched, not out of fear, but muscle memory. A man stepped out of the shadows, scanning the yard with a flashlight. My instincts took over. I moved silently between two parked trailers, slipping through blind spots until I was far enough to breathe again. As I headed toward my truck, I spotted tire tracks, fresh ones, leading into the woods behind the yard. Curiosity pulled me like a hook. I followed the tracks through frost-crusted brush until I reached an old hunting cabin. Lights glowed faintly through cracked blinds. Footprints circled the building. The voices inside were low, tense, carrying that same mix of English and foreign dialect. I edged closer, finding a cracked window. Inside, Sheriff Cutter was pacing, jabbing his finger at a map spread across the table. Doyle stood by the wall, face pale as snow. Two foreign contractors watched them with arms crossed. Cutter's voice cut through the room. "That soldier girl is poking around again. She's supposed to be dead." Doyle said something I couldn't hear, and Cutter snapped back. "You think Whitlock cares? He'll erase this whole damn town if she exposes anything." Hearing my existence framed as a threat to an entire town didn't bring satisfaction. It brought clarity. They weren't scared of me. They were terrified of what I survived. As I crept away, a twig cracked under my boot. The voices inside stopped. A door swung open. Flashlight beams stabbed into the dark. I stayed perfectly still, pressed against the cabin wall, controlling my breath the way I did in sniper hideouts overseas. After a long, cold minute, the lights retreated. My heart hammered, but not from fear, from awakening. I wasn't investigating corruption anymore. I was standing on a battlefield again, and the enemy was preparing to strike first. That night, back in my tiny rented room, I laid out everything I'd learned. The documents, the photos, the overheard conversations. It painted a picture uglier than the war I escaped. Saber Creek wasn't collateral damage. It was a front. The people who grew up alongside me were being used as cover for an operation that stretched far beyond state lines. And Whitlock wasn't acting alone. He was orchestrating something national, something that required soldiers like me to vanish so no one questioned the supply routes or the money trails. The town didn't forget me by accident. Forgetting me was required. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands shaking, not from fear, but from a terrifying realization. I was the only living witness to a crime that killed my entire unit, and the people responsible were still active, still coordinated, still protected. The kind of people who didn't just kill to silence, they rewrote reality. They changed records. They altered reports. They turned soldiers into ghosts with a keyboard stroke. If they wanted me erased, they would keep trying, and maybe they'd succeed. Unless I stopped playing defense. I stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I didn't see the girl who enlisted for patriotism. I didn't see the soldier who fought her way out of a frozen death trap. I saw someone the military created, abandoned, and then tried to destroy. And that version of me wasn't afraid anymore. She was focused, she was awake, and she understood that you don't survive a massacre like Frostline Ridge just to roll over when the same killers come knocking in your hometown. So I made a decision that felt more like instinct than choice. If Saber Creek wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. But while they slept behind locked doors and corrupt protection, I'd move through the shadows they forgot to check. I'd peel back every lie, every bribe, every false report. I'd expose Whitlock piece by piece until he had nowhere left to hide. I wasn't doing it for glory or recognition. I was doing it for the soldiers whose dog tags froze beside mine in that cold valley. I was doing it because someone needed to speak for those who never got to come home. And I was doing it because the one thing more dangerous than a forgotten soldier is one who remembers everything. The breaking point came on a night when the sky hung low with thick clouds, the kind that make the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. I had spent days gathering evidence, nights sneaking around the edges of Saber Creek like a ghost with unfinished business. And the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Whitlock wasn't just connected to the corruption, he was the architect. Every bribe, every manipulated record, every soldier marked KIA instead of missing, every shipment disguised as municipal supplies, it all led back to him. And I couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. At some point, a soldier has to stop observing and start acting. Frostline Wedge didn't take my fear, it took my hesitation. So that evening, I walked into the heart of the beast with the kind of cold calm only trauma can teach you. I didn't go to the sheriff's office or the mayor's house. I went to the warehouse behind the trucking yard, the one that had cameras pointed outward but not inward, the one I had seen contractors slip into at odd hours. The front gate was locked, but locks don't mean much to someone who spent half her deployment learning how to bypass them. I slipped through a gap in the fence, moving quietly across the gravel. A diesel generator hummed behind the building, masking any hint of my footsteps. The air smelled like oil, cold metal, and the kind of chemicals you don't use for anything legal. I made my way to a side door propped open by a brick, as if someone inside couldn't be bothered to hide their arrogance. Inside, the warehouse was dim except for a few hanging bulbs. Shadows stretched long and thin, like they were pointing towards something I was meant to see. And there it was. Rows of large crates stamped with fake municipal codes. I pried one open with a crowbar I found near the entrance. What stared back at me wasn't food, wasn't emergency supplies, wasn't anything a town should ever need. Military-grade equipment, optics, encrypted radios, weapon components, the stuff we used overseas, the stuff we guarded with our lives, the stuff no civilian town should ever have access to. I slammed the crate shut, breathing hard. The Frostline Ridge mission wasn't a disaster. It was a smokescreen. We weren't sent to dismantle a supply route. We were sent because we got too close to seeing what Whitlock was doing. We weren't soldiers in his operation. We were liabilities. I took out my phone to document everything, but before I could snap more than one picture, a voice echoed through the warehouse. "You should have stayed out of this, Brooks." Sheriff Cutter stepped out from behind a stack of crates, gun in hand, face twisted with the kind of anger a coward wears when they think they finally have the upper hand. He wasn't alone. 2 foreign contractors flanked him, rifles slung casually, like they were bored more than threatened. Cutter pointed his gun at me while trying to look confident. He wasn't. He was shaking. A man who lives off bribes and intimidation isn't used to facing someone who's already survived death. I took a slow breath, hands raised, not out of fear, but calculation. I said softly, "You think Whitlock's gonna protect you if I disappear?" Cutter's jaw tightened. Good, I hit a nerve. "You're just another name on his list. You think you're safe? The second you outlive your usefulness, you'll be declared dead from a hunting accident." The contractors glanced at each other. That's the problem with hired guns. They don't like being reminded they're expendable. Cutter barked at them to grab me, but he was already losing control. I turned that moment into an opening. Combat training isn't something you forget. It lives in your bones. The second Cutter's aim wavered, I lunged forward, knocking his wrist aside. The shot went wide, echoing off the metal walls. One contractor raised his rifle, but I ducked behind a stack of crates as bullets tore through cardboard and splintered wood. Adrenaline sharpened everything. The hum of electricity in the lights, the smell of gunpowder, the soft crunch of boots approaching. I moved fast, staying low, weaving between crates while they fired blindly. I grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and swung it hard at the first contractor who rounded the corner. He collapsed with a grunt, weapons skidding across the floor. I didn't stop. I grabbed the rifle, rolled behind a forklift, and returned fire, not to kill, just to drive them back. Cutter panicked, shouting orders nobody listened to. Chaos was something I understood. He didn't. That's when the front bay door screeched open. A black SUV rolled in, headlights off. The contractors froze. Cutter lowered his gun, and my blood ran cold. Colonel Whitlock stepped out wearing a tailored coat and an expression that told me he'd been waiting a long time for this moment. He looked older than I remembered, more polished, like he'd traded in his military integrity for a corporate expense account. But his eyes were the same, calculating, predatory, empty. "Sergeant Brooks," he said with a slow smirk, "you survived again. Impressive, but inconvenient." His calmness was worse than Cutter's panic. It told me this wasn't a confrontation. This was cleanup. He motioned to Cutter to step aside, and the sheriff moved like a dog eager to please. Whitlock walked toward me with the confidence of a man who believed the world was designed to protect him. He said, "You were supposed to freeze to death in that valley, but fate is funny, isn't it?" My hands tightened on the rifle. I wanted to shoot him. I wanted to end it right there. But there were too many guns pointed at me, and Whitlock knew it. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think anyone will believe you? You're a ghost. On paper, you've been dead for years." My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the clarity of knowing exactly who I was fighting. This wasn't a corrupt cop. This wasn't a shady mayor. This was the man who orchestrated the deaths of my unit, who tried to erase me, who used Saber Creek as a pawn in a national conspiracy. And he stood there like I was nothing more than a loose end to tie up. He gave a simple nod, and Cutter raised his gun again. But before he pulled the trigger, headlights flashed through the back door. Someone else had arrived. Deputies. Town officials, not loyal to Whitlock, but summoned by the gunfire. The warehouse erupted in panic. Contractors moved to secure exits. Cutter yelled conflicting orders. Whitlock cursed under his breath. In the chaos, nobody noticed me slip behind a forklift, climb a ladder, and crawl across the overhead catwalk. The metal groaned under my weight, but it held. From above, I could see the entire warehouse in disarray. Cutter searching for me, contractors checking crates, Whitlock shielding himself behind a stack of equipment like the coward he truly was. I should have taken the shot. Clean angle, clear line of sight. One bullet could have ended everything. But killing him wouldn't expose the truth. Killing him would bury it. So instead, I shot the generator. Sparks exploded, plunging the warehouse into darkness. People screamed, officers panicked, Cutter fired wildly. Whitlock shouted for backup, and I used the chaos to vanish into the night, slipping through a broken window as sirens blared across the lot. I ran through the woods until my lungs burned and my legs shook, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the glow of flashing lights lit up the tree line. They weren't searching for an intruder. They were searching for a dead soldier who suddenly became the most dangerous witness in the state. By the time I reached my truck, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that everything had changed. Whitlock wasn't hiding anymore. He was hunting. And now, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. I didn't go home that night. Home wasn't safe. Hell, nowhere felt safe. Whitlock had resources, money, connections, and worst of all, the audacity of a man who believed the law existed to protect him, not the people he was supposed to serve. So instead of driving toward town, I took the back roads into the foothills, parking at a turnout where the pines swallowed the world whole. My heart was still racing, and the cold crept through my sleeves, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Whitlock thought he'd cornered me. He thought I'd run like a scared animal. But he forgot something. Soldiers don't run. We regroup. I turned off my truck lights and sat in silence while the engine clicked and cooled. My hands shook as I scrolled through my phone. I didn't have much proof. One picture of the crates, a few audio clips I'd recorded from Cutter's threats, but it wasn't enough to expose a man like Whitlock. I needed leverage, documents, names, the kind of evidence that couldn't be dismissed as the ramblings of a rogue veteran resurfacing from the dead. And somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and exhaustion, a darker realization settled over me. I didn't just want to expose him. I wanted him to feel the weight of everything he'd done. I wanted him to know what it was like to lose control, to lose power, to lose the illusion of safety. Not revenge, accountability, a reckoning. As I sat there, headlights flashed behind me. My chest tightened. I reached for the rifle under my seat, ready to move, ready to fight. But when the door of the approaching vehicle swung open, it wasn't a contractor or a deputy. It was Old Man Rudd, the retired mechanic who used to repair military vehicles on base, back when I was still a fresh recruit with too much hope and not enough scars. He approached slowly, holding up his hands like he was coming toward a spooked horse. "I know you're out here, kid," he said quietly. "If I could figure that out, they can too." His presence hit me hard. Rudd had been like a father figure to half the soldiers who passed through this county. I didn't know whether to hug him or tell him to leave before he got dragged into my mess. But Rudd wasn't the type to scare easy. He leaned against the bed of my truck and lit a cigarette. "Town's buzzing," he said, exhaling smoke into the cold air. "Sheriff claims some out-of-state smugglers caused the shootout. Folks are buying it for now." I scoffed. Of course, Cutter could sell snow to Alaska if Whitlock wrote the script. Then Rudd's eyes narrowed. "You saw something, didn't you?" I hesitated. Trust wasn't something I gave out anymore, not since Frostline Ridge. But Rudd had never lied to me, never treated me like broken glass. So I told him everything. The warehouse, the crates, Whitlock's appearance, the history, the lies, the night my unit froze while radio silence hung heavy over the mountain like a second death. Rudd didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he crushed his cigarette with his boot and looked like a man who'd been forced to swallow a truth he could barely stomach. "Whitlock's dirty," he said finally. "Always has been. Hid it behind medals and handshakes." I raised an eyebrow. Rudd wasn't usually this blunt. He sighed. "I used to work logistics on your base, remember? We had shipments disappear before they even made it to the motor pool. Reports got buried. Complaints got lost. Soldiers who raised hell got reassigned." He paused. "Or worse." His eyes met mine, and something unspoken passed between us. Whitlock's corruption wasn't new. Frostline Ridge wasn't an accident. This had been going on for years. It made me sick. But Rudd wasn't finished. "You ain't gonna beat Whitlock by barging in guns blazing," he said. "He's got the badges, the influence, the good old boys eaten out of his hand." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Then how?" His answer came with the ghost of a smile. "You expose him the same way you take down a faulty engine, piece by piece, one bolt, one wire, one lie at a time." His words planted something in me, direction, purpose, a strategy. Not just to survive, but to strike back. And then he handed me something I didn't expect, a drive, the kind used on secure military systems. "Found this years ago. Didn't know what to do with it. Didn't trust anyone with it. But you," he nodded, "you were the only one who ever kept her oath." When I plugged the drive into my laptop, the screen filled with encrypted files. And then they slowly opened up. Manifests, shipment logs, bank transfers, audio recordings, emails from Whitlock's burner accounts, maps of transport routes, documentation of missing soldiers declared deceased long before their time. And at the bottom, the one file that almost shattered me, a classified directive, Frostline Ridge Operation. Under objectives, the text read, "Terminate compromised personnel. Recover or destroy evidence." Terminate. Compromised personnel, meaning me, meaning my unit, meaning we weren't sent to complete a mission, we were the mission. Something inside me hardened. There's a difference between grief and fury, and this moment carved the line in stone. I wasn't a survivor anymore. I wasn't a forgotten soldier. I wasn't a ghost returning to save a town that pretended not to recognize me. I was the reckoning Whitlock never saw coming. The twist didn't stop there. As I scrolled through more files, I found something that made my stomach drop. A list of local officials who were financially connected to Whitlock's operation. Cutter, the mayor, 2 council members, a judge. But then, deeper down the list, a name I never expected. A federal agent stationed in the state capitol. Someone who should have protected people like me, not sold us out like livestock. This wasn't a town scandal. This was federal-level rot. Whitlock wasn't the top of the pyramid. He was just the one close enough to my life to destroy it. I sat back in my truck, numb, shaking, overwhelmed. The truth was so much bigger, darker, and more networked than I had imagined. My unit didn't die from bad intel. They were executed by bureaucracy disguised as patriotism. And the people of Saber Creek, the ones who forgot me, ignored me, dismissed me, they had no idea they were living in the center of a quiet war for profit. The twist didn't crush me. It steadied me. It explained the nightmare. It gave shape to the enemy. And suddenly, I wasn't scared anymore. Not of Whitlock, not of Cutter, not of the town, not even of the past. I whispered into the darkness, "You should have finished the job, Colonel." Because now I had the truth. Now I had the proof. And now I had a plan. What Whitlock didn't know was that this story wasn't about a broken soldier crawling back from the dead. It was about a woman who survived hell once and was ready to drag the monsters into the light. When the sun finally rose over the foothills, it felt like looking at a world I hadn't seen in years. Not the sleepy town that forgot my name. Not the ghosts of my unit frozen in the snow of Frostline Ridge. Not the nightmares or the lies or the weight I'd been dragging behind me like a broken limb. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from something. I was walking toward it, with purpose, with clarity, with the truth clenched in my fist like a compass pointing me home. I didn't take the files to the sheriff. I didn't take them to the mayor. I didn't walk into any station, office, or courthouse within spitting distance of Whitlock's influence. Instead, I drove straight to the one entity that terrified men like him more than gunfire ever could. The press. Not the small-town paper that ran headlines about church bake sales and fishing tournaments. No. I went to a regional investigative journalist who'd exposed police corruption 3 towns over. A woman who didn't care about favors, didn't care about who she pissed off, didn't bend for badges or bank accounts. When I walked into her office and dropped the flash drive onto her desk, she didn't even blink, just asked, "Do you need water or a lawyer first?" I told her everything. She recorded every word. She cross-checked every file. She didn't treat me like a ghost. She treated me like a survivor, like a witness, like someone who mattered. When she finally looked up from the drive, her face was pale. "You know this is gonna burn your entire town to the ground," she said quietly. I shrugged. Maybe it deserves to. But deep down, what I meant was something softer. Maybe the truth is the only way to rebuild anything worth saving. The story went live 48 hours later. Front page, headlines, broadcasts, thousands of shares. And within 6 hours, the town that forgot me suddenly remembered my name like it was carved in stone. Whitlock denied everything. Cutter tried to hide. The contractors fled. But corruption rots fast when you drag it into the sunlight. Federal investigators swarmed the county. Files were seized, accounts frozen, warrants issued. The judge on Whitlock's payroll was arrested at his lake house. Council members stepped down overnight. Cutter was picked up trying to cross state lines. And Whitlock, the man who orchestrated my unit's death, was photographed being escorted out of his mansion in handcuffs, screaming about conspiracies, betrayal, and missions civilians couldn't understand. He finally understood something, though. Power is just borrowed authority, and the people you hurt are the ones who eventually come to collect. The town reacted the way towns always do when their illusions crack open. Some folks pretended they always had a feeling. Some apologized, too late, but still with trembling voices. Some avoided me completely, scared of what they might see reflected back. Some finally stood up, realizing silence is just another kind of cowardice. And a few hugged me with tears in their eyes, thanking me for saving a place that didn't save me when I needed it. I didn't do it for them, but hearing it mattered more than I expected. One night, a week after Whitlock's arrest, I walked through the center of Sabre Creek. The square was quiet, the streetlights humming soft and warm. Kids rode bikes near the fountain. A couple argued on a bench. A group of old men played cards outside the diner. Just normal life, the kind soldiers like me spent years fighting to protect, even when the people living it never knew our names. And somehow, that felt like enough. As I passed the memorial wall, the one with names of local veterans etched in brass, I stopped dead in my tracks. Someone had added a fresh plate. My name, my rank, the dates of my service, the emblem of my unit. Clean, centered, unmistakable. I stared at it so long my vision blurred. Not because I needed the recognition, not because the town owed me a plaque, but because it meant one simple, powerful thing. They finally saw me. Not the ghost, not the rumor, not the forgotten soldier. They saw the woman who came back anyway. I touched the plate with the tips of my fingers and whispered the names of my unit, every single one of them, because they deserve to be remembered too. Not as casualties, not as compromised personnel, but as soldiers who were brave enough to serve under a system that failed them, brave enough to trust their leaders, even when their leaders were unworthy, brave enough to follow orders into a valley that betrayed them. I carried them with me. I always would. In the months that followed, the town rebuilt itself, piece by piece. New elections, new leadership, new safeguards. People talked openly about corruption instead of burying it under small-town pride. Veterans came forward, sharing stories they'd been too scared to voice. Some were sad, some were heavy, some were just memories of better days. But all of them mattered. And somewhere along that road, I found something I didn't expect. Peace. Not the kind where everything becomes perfect, not the kind you find in silence or forgiveness, but the kind you earn after fighting a war nobody else knew existed. The kind that comes when you finally understand yourself, your scars, your strength, your purpose. I started working with returning veterans, the ones who came home to places that didn't understand them, the ones drowning in silence, the ones like me, alive on paper, dead in spirit. I helped them find resources, jobs, support. I listened, I spoke. I made sure they knew they were never burdens, never invisible, never forgotten. Because if my story taught me anything, it's this. Being forgotten doesn't make you powerless. Being underestimated doesn't make you weak. And sometimes the people who walk away from you are the ones who need saving the most. I didn't come back to Sabre Creek for a parade. I didn't come back for applause. I came back for answers. And I left with something better. A reason. A reminder. A truth bigger than the revenge I once craved. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control who you become because of it. Whitlock lost everything. The town regained itself. And I found my way home not because they welcomed me, but because I stopped waiting for permission to belong. Some people say heroes are the ones who save the world, but sometimes heroes are the ones who survive it and then teach others how to survive too. And that's a story worth remembering.